Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Joining me today on this roundtable are three people from Network Music, all with excellent characters. So I welcome Terry McBride, CEO, Chris Norwood, Head of Strategy, and Karen Mix, Director of People Operations. And the podcast we will discuss is called Building Character. And first, to a quick summary of the podcast. It's the third in a series on personality, and it begins with the distinction between personality and character. The former you are born with, and the latter you build. And character is then defined as a moral stance to the world, and good character seeks flourishing for self and for others. Character is then examined through the twin lenses of moral realism and evolutionary adaptation. According to moral realism, there are objective grounds for character development, specifically that a scientific psychology can identify and measure ways that do lead to human flourishing, and equally can identify ways that are immoral in the sense that they undermine human flourishing for self and others. The evolutionary perspective shows that there are moral intuitions built into our genetic inheritance. So moral sentiments such as gratitude, compassion, love, as well as outrage, selfishness, dishonesty, can be understood in Darwinian terms, which again reflects a moral realism. I then provide examples of character development, starting with the importance of recalibrating our more extreme personality traits where they collide uncomfortably with reality. And the notion here is that although these extremes provide strengths, they typically provide systematic, predictable distortions in our appraisals of reality. So these need to be recalibrated to enable our flourishing, ideally with similar interpersonal effects, namely the flourishing of others. There is also a discussion of the dark triad personality disorders of sociopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism, and how they're so shocking given our inherited moral intuitions. I end on the observation that cultivating relationships is the key, not only to a viable morality, but to a life of satisfaction and well-being. All right, so now to my good friends with the excellent characters from Network Music. How are you, my friends?
Doing well.
Doing well, excellent. There's quite a lot in this podcast. It's a little different to other ones in that I had to sort of prepare the ground theoretically a fair bit. So I'm really interested in your take on that. I hope you found it engaging. I was worried I got a bit nerdy. So we'll see. Was certainly not my intent because I see this as very, very practical. But I don't want to lead the witness. So who would like to kick off with their responses to the podcast?
I think I can get us started here. And as a self-professed nerd myself, I very much appreciated the nerdy components of this, what they were. And what I found, what really caught me was the discussion around sort of a scientific basis for morality, and which sort of implies that there is an objective moral versus immoral that is not necessarily defined by culture or political perspective, for example. And where this spun me around a fair bit is, even if we look across a political divide, you often see one side claiming that the other is immoral and the other side claiming that that other side is immoral. And if there is truly an objective basis there, they can't both be right. They could both be wrong, but they can't really both be right in that claim. And anyway, how this loops back from a character or building character perspective is that if we're thinking about it as this, okay, how am I optimizing or maximizing for my flourishing and the flourishing of other people in a, zero sum way, there's a whole segment of the population that might consider that progress that I make to be actually working against their flourishing.
Yeah.
How would we navigate this?
Just that last point. Could you just explain that again? I was just thinking about something else while you said that last little bit.
Yeah. So if the work that I'm doing on a character building perspective is meant to improve my flourishing and the flourishing of the people that,
Mm.
I don't even want to group it as like I'm on the same side of, but just like based around my perspective, what I think is the right flourishing for people.
Mm.
There's a whole other group of people that might potentially think of that character development as harming them
Yes.
because we're on the other side of these issues. And I think it could be true no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. You can look at it, you'd make the same argument in defense both ways. So I
Yes.
guess what I'm asking is like, how do we navigate
Mm.
this? Like, what I'm trying to do might be what I would think in everybody's best interest, but there's a whole subset of the people that would disagree with me on that.
All right. There's a whole lot of, I wouldn't call them caveats. I think there's just nuances here.
Mhm.
The first thing is that I recommended Sam Harris's book, The Moral
Mhm.
Landscape, and a key metaphor in there is this idea of it being a landscape with peaks and valleys. The peaks being sort of the moral goods, and the valleys being the moral bads. And an obvious point is there's many ways of reaching flourishing. There's not one way,
Right.
and there's many ways of the opposite of not finding meaning and purpose and happiness in life. Right. So that's one thing. So people opposing each other from a polarization point of view, they might think they have the moral right, but they could both be wrong,
Mhm.
or they both could have, and probably do have, they're halfway up the mountain, as it were. They're both halfway up the mountain. Right, there are truths that they hold to that I think are defensible, and then there are other things that are
Right.
under examination would seem to be not defensible,
Mhm.
right? And so another nuance here is that, and I think I mentioned it somewhere in the podcast, that we are, and this is an evolutionary point of view, that we are experts at deceiving ourselves. And from an evolutionary point of view, that's actually quite a useful skill, because if we can deceive ourselves, it's a lot easier to deceive others,
Yeah.
because of all the body language and so on, right? So there's a lot of moral self-deception in the service of being right and the other person being wrong, and there's and this is one of the evolutionary points of view too, is that we're incredibly prone to perceiving in groups and out groups, and so that kind of moral position is not necessarily a good one,
Mhm.
but it's hardwired in because it's probably good, would have been good for the genes. That's why it was passed along, right? Whereas what we're talking about is a more the ability to step back and look at, in Sam Harris's argument, is flourishing, and it turns out that true flourishing can't be based on zero-sum games because of our interdependent nature. If the other side's really angry with us, that's not my fault necessarily. There's plenty of people who are upset in the world. It's got nothing to do with me, even if they think it is. Right. So that's part of that navigating that interesting space. And like some people listening to this podcast, who maybe have a strong religious belief that the only basis for morals is religious belief, they could be angry with me for saying that that's not a solid basis, that there is a scientific basis, and I would understand that anger, but I wouldn't think that I'm disrupting their flourishing.
Mhm.
I think that's a different thing. So it's not necessarily about being able to navigate the world without upsetting people. Right. My wife often puts it this way, that very often, if not all the time, people are just upsets waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And, I guess there's an element here of the need for wisdom. Like when we're young, I think we think of the moral good as, being a winner, or it's more, it's more about pleasures and getting stuff and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully as we mature and as our moral thinking matures, we realize that's pretty empty, and it comes and it goes, and it doesn't, it's hedonic, it's like hedonism rather than eudaimonic in the sense of a broader satisfaction of purpose. So I think as a person's thinking matures, they begin to realize that their true happiness has to do with community, relationship, the thriving of people, and contributing to that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not, again, that's different. You can't make people flourish. That's definitely up to them. But you can impede their flourishing, by lying and deceit and so on. And there's a whole science of human flourishing in psychology now, which I think is what Sam Harris is referring to. And we know, the Harvard study on adult development, it's crystal clear. There is no better evidence, over an 85-year longitudinal study across hundreds or thousands of people. And it's clear that the quality, not just the quantity, the quality of relationships and honesty and integrity and trust and compassion, these are the things that reliably make people happy, and they're moral goods in the Sam Harris view. Mm-hmm. Now, how did I go? Because there were a number of things you said. I think I've probably touched on the latter stuff. Mm-hmm. Where did I miss?
No, I think that's really helpful. I think, there's sort of like you can't please everybody component here, and but the interesting thing that you said there is that like my flourishing doesn't necessarily mean a lack of flourishing for somebody else. No. Right. I can't remember the exact wording you used there, but it was sort of an interesting, like, they may perceive it as that, but that's not necessarily actually what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, if you think like you might be a parent, well, you are a parent.
I am.
And let's say, part of your job is the moral development of your children.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be times when they just naturally fall into morally questionable behaviours. They might hit their sibling or, destroy something because they're cranky, whatever. And so you may, disapprove of that firmly. And you're doing that because you love them and because you're providing moral instruction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They may not see it that way. And, so I think the same applies throughout life. And there's plenty of highly moral people who have been crucified or jailed or persecuted by the immoral.
Mm-hmm. And
I would argue that on the side of immorality, it's always ignorance.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's the other thing here is when you can inquire into what is a moral choice and you have some grounds for that, i.e., experience of life gradually teaches you, you can identify these things. And as I said, psychology is, positive psychology and moral psychology, they've identified attitudes and actions that much more reliably lead to this sense of eudaimonic satisfaction and well-being, and we call those moral goods.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not easy. I mean, it's like It's for every human, it's an empirical inquiry until the day they draw their last breath.
Right.
Yeah. We get it wrong a lot. Yeah. Partly because we self-deceive. Yeah.
Great job.
Who's next? I I ask with some trepidation.
Yeah, this was a big one. Like Chris, I had to listen to it a couple of times, and
Yeah.
this might be slightly elementary, but you said good moral behavior boosts status, and I was like, what? Good moral behavior boosts status. So good behavior is subjective. And that was just kind of a light bulb for me. I'm like, but because I've always been like the good is good and very black and white about kind of like you do bad. So it just, when you look at the world and the power figures in the world, that just kind of, it resonated with me of like good behavior boosts status, but then why?
It's not the only thing. It's not the only thing that boosts status, right? Maybe I should talk a little bit about. I mean, if you go back to our ancestral environment and you're living in a small group of people, everyone who knows everyone else very well, after a while, bad behaviour becomes very obvious and becomes a real problem. And so, what happened in evolutionary history, it appears, is that there was a sort of arms race between cheaters and cheater detection, right? So, so people who would lie and cheat and steal within a small group of people, they're threatening the survival of the group because we need everyone to be contributing, not just freeloading. And so that would have had existential implications to allow a person to not detect when someone is cheating, lying. That's why the theory is that's why we've got such deep outrage when we discover that someone's lying to us or they're cheating, right? And it's very intense. It's very intense, and you can kind of see that from an evolutionary point of view. It's life or death, right? And so in that environment, moral behaviour, in the sense that we're talking about, would have accorded higher status. Traits of selfishness and kindness and generosity would have been perceived as very, very important and valuable, right? And but the problem we have in modern life, first off, is people can get away with being dishonest and lying and pretending to be virtuous. Yeah. And we don't have access, or as we know in the current circumstance, the zone is just flooded with shit. It's hard to get to the truth, right? Like even within really bad relationships, like an intimate relationship where there's violence going on and the sociopathic person is gaslighting the other person, right? From outside it can be hard to see what the truth is, but inside there. So there are problems here. So when I say it accords status, it does, but it's not the only thing that accords status. But maybe talking about esteem is the way to get to this. I tend to think there are three types of esteem. There is what I would call real esteem, which is the esteem that we have from people who really know us. And then there's self-esteem, which is our view of ourself, which hopefully we recalibrate over time to be accurate. But the third type is pseudo-esteem, and that's the esteem that we're held in by people who don't really know us. And pseudo-esteem is a kind of currency that can be very valuable. It's like my reputation as a psychologist, or, an artist's brand, the fans don't really know them, but they think they're great. You know, you know what I mean? Yes, I know they're assessing their music as well, but and status in our culture now has kind of monetized and massively expanded this notion of pseudo-esteem, and so there's a moral problem at the heart of that, because people have very, very, very high status, but they may be very morally questionable characters,
Right.
And it's hard to tell. And even when it is, we've decided there's enough people in the village who disagree, and they're sort of taken in by the pseudo-esteem. These are complicated, waters. But have I correctly responded to what your question was? I'm not sure if I have.
No, absolutely, Doctor, because that was because it's not it's certainly is subjective, but I don't know why.
Oh, sorry. What's subjective?
That it's not just that good moral behavior boosts status. There's other influences, other factors in boosting status.
Yeah, status is not a measure, is not the definition of moral behavior.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Of good character.
And the
but good character does generate status in people who recognize the good character.
Yeah,
So
totally.
if you think about people you really admire and respect, it'll be because they've got good character, and you accord them great status for that, right? And I would argue that kind of status is like real esteem is real status, in the sense of it's based on something.
It's based on something, yeah.
Absolutely, and a scientific approach to that could identify the behaviours, the thought structures, and so on that reliably lead to that person flourishing and the people around them flourishing. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Terry.
So you brought up the concept of pseudo-esteem, and I'm glad that you did.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really curious that if all of these studies were done 2 years from now, how they might diverge in some really interesting ways. So I think the whole pseudo-esteem around the morally corrupt and the repetition of the lies and having no shame, no disgrace,
Yeah.
no honor for those lies,
Yeah.
has shaped a power that is incredible in this world right now. And in the past, a decade ago, it would never have flown. You're caught in a lie, and you are shamed. You have no honor. You know, if I go back even in America to the McCarthyism.
Yeah.
McCarthyism looks like preschool compared to what's happening now, where lies are accepted, they're expected, they're given esteem, even if it's pseudo, to the point that pseudo esteem actually in like the eyes of so many becomes a real esteem.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm really curious, if you was to go back and do this scientific study 2 years from now, what would they see in, because now we have a cultural movement that's all about lying.
Yeah.
And don't care. You caught me, don't care. It's actually a badge of honor. So, and I'm not passing judgment here. I'm just saying I'm just fascinated to see what the science would say about this with a whole new set a few years.
Well, I think that the idea of a moral realism is that it's real, right? Like so, and eventually, immoral behaviour causes suffering, and the whole catastrophe that's going on at present, it's going to lead to some pretty bad shit, right? It has to, and
Well, I mean, interestingly, it's leading to bad shit, and in a profound way, possibly some good shit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Because
So,
of people's
how do
reaction.
you, I mean,
Yes, I understand.
how do you balance the emotional carnage on one side for what might also be something that nobody thought would ever get resolved, such as, I'm not saying it is, but the Middle East for one.
Yeah. Look,
So
I think.
does it
Well, I think
it's just wild to watch, right?
it is wild to watch, and but you're right to raise it because obviously we're discussing character here and morality, and
Well, I also thought, the Discover Alive was like very valid till 4 or 5 years ago.
yeah,
I am not
yeah.
sure it's valid now.
Yes, though you would see that people never admit their lie. I mean, they just they dismiss it. They dismiss that in fact it was a lie. So there is a kind of deception about deception, right? And history will disprove that if it's written from any kind of more independent standpoint, of course. What do they say? History is written by the victors. So we'll see. But I think any kind of scientific objective inquiry, eventually the truth is out. But it might take a long time, by which time these people, either are no longer with us or they've absconded with their ill-gotten gains. But I think the flip side of this is that there is a kind of I think there's sort of been a moral complacency for quite a long time that has bred a vulnerability to this, and it's I don't know. This I'm not a political scientist, so I don't want to stray too far from my
No,
wheelhouse.
and I'm not trying to. I'm just focused upon the litany of lies and how before
Yeah, I know.
that would have brought shame, and now it brings honor. And
Well,
and I just find that, I mean, in today's culture, or a good chunk of it, that's how it's viewed.
yeah, but it's held. It's for those who do accord it honour. It's held in a larger frame that there is some higher good that justifies it, right?
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
in a strange way, that might actually be happening, which is
Well, in some instances, yeah, and
which I thought would
but
never ever be like humanly possible.
but in the like in the US example, half the population though is absolutely outraged by the lying, which is a normal evolutionary response, and the other half is part of the coalition. See, the evolutionary psychology looks at human beings as a political animal.
Yeah.
That our survival depended on developing a really advanced politic. And I don't mean by that governments and parliaments and so on. I just mean coalitions and it's all about getting the genes into the next generation, right? So you can have success from an evolutionary point of view, but that's quite a different thing to what we're talking about a morality. And so just to be clear, let me be clear.
But if that morality wins,
Which morality?
The corrupt morality, the lying morality,
the immorality,
the immorality wins, then the next generation, because they've won, is born with that into their personality.
Yeah. Not it. No, no. It's not born into their personality. See, let me say no. But what is passed on is a culture,
Mm-hmm.
and that is very powerful. And see, I think this is probably a point I didn't emphasize enough in the podcast, and this might be crucial. Evolution doesn't give a shit about our happiness and our moral well-being and so on. It's not about that. It's about selection pressures to pass on your genes. Right? So that's kind of that. Except by the accident of our evolution, this particular species, because of the way we evolved to be incredibly socially interdependent for survival, because we had children that require so much nurture for such a long period of time, they're basically born immature, like they're born premature, really, because to get out the birth canal. What was selected for were a lot of the things that we would now consider to be moral virtues, like loving and caring and gratitude and compassion and so on. And so because you need to have that altruistic stance for the offspring to survive long enough and so on. But also we needed that for beyond our kin, to friends and tribe, because you have non-zero sum games and you're more likely to survive. Right. So once we get to a point where we more or less are going to pass on our genes to the next generation reliably, say like in modern life, most of us are going to live, to a natural term. The other accident of evolution is our consciousness, and especially reflexive awareness. And of course, we've noticed, hey, when we operate in certain ways, it's better for everyone. It's non-zero sum games, and it makes me happier. So now we can construct a different purpose for our life beyond passing on our genes. And we might call that purpose, flourishing. And in a sense, flourishing is an emergent possibility, and it has to be worked on individually across the lifespan. But I think it's the only project worth our time. And there are many, many ways towards flourishing. Like you guys, support the flourishing of wonderful music, and that then spreads the love. So that's moral good in my view. But it's that's the issue here. It's not about, yes, you can have bad actors win, and there often is a tension between our sort of more directly Darwinian drive to get my genes into the next generation. There's always a tension between that and this social good. All right, and so that's why it's always messy, and there'll be fluctuations historically. And but I think, I hope, we're going to see a correction somewhere down the track when enough people get upset enough and enough people realise they're being lied to and come out of the self-deception. But remember that self-deception, and we're all prone to it, is very much a part of being an identity of being in a group that validates them for being in the group, and that just plugs straight into our evolutionary instincts, right? But the way out of it for us all as individuals is to rise above it intellectually, and therefore morally, and figure out what's the appropriate behaviour for me. How do I create happiness in my own life, but also for those around me, even given the circumstances? Not easy. Holy moly.
How was a moly holy?
Yeah, I mean,
very, very timely.
Yeah,
it is timely, and I've been asked a lot by people, how do we navigate this time? It's very difficult. How do I keep my balance? How do I stay positive? And it's obviously it's very complex in the modern world with social media and digital media, and just who controls the narrative, and finding ways to rise above. But I suspect that if we all treated each other with more kindness and compassion, that'd be a good start, even to people who have views we don't like. Mm-hmm. We'll see. Yeah. All right, my friends, I'm not sure what our next podcast is going to be because I haven't written it yet. But
we're like still chewing on the last three, so it's okay.
yes, and
Indeed.
we will reconvene when I have written said podcast. But as always, look, absolute delight, and I actually meant what I said up front about excellent characters. So it's a great honour to have these regular conversations with you guys. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
All right, my friends. See ya.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too.